how do you handle your repetition ranges close to a contest? The old school thought has been that when you increase your repetitions, like you start doing 15 sets of 20 reps, 25 reps, that you create a little bit more muscular definition, separation, things like that. This is one of the ones I feel very strongly about, and I feel that is a very wrong way to think. I am 100% against that. A lot of things in our industry they're not so black and white. You got to look at the context and the situation that someone's in. But this is one of the few things that is pretty black and white to me. I believe that when you lighten the weight up, you're asking for your muscles to essentially shrink. A muscle fiber doesn't have to produce the same amount of force. It doesn't have the same tension applied to it. And you had to build your weight up, your tension, all those things had to happen for you to get to the size that you got to. So you had to train a little heavier in some cases, or train with some more tension. You had to load the muscle fibers a little differently. You had to exhaust them a little differently. But all those things kind of helped you get to where you're at. And then it's like you put everything in reverse. And you say, okay, now I'm going to lighten up and not use heavy weights anymore. And I think that's a very risky way of thinking, because the muscle fiber, again, it has no reason for any positive adaptation. It's going to, if it doesn't need to be as strong, it doesn't need to produce as much force, it doesn't need to produce as much tension, I think you have a real risk of the muscle getting smaller. And that's just what I've seen over the years. Now, I will say this, if you're an astute student of the game, you could say, well, John, what about taking the sets to failure that are a little bit lighter, maybe 60% of your one rep max, as opposed to like the normal 80% of your one rep maxes that you use? And I get that. I get that. I get the everybody now calls it metabolic training, where you're looking for growth via metabolites and things like that, all that sciencey stuff. I do get that. But I would still always tell you, make sure you don't abandon the sets of 6, the sets of 8, the sets of 10. Don't abandon those. I really, really think that those are very valuable, and particularly the sets of 6 to 8 and fast twitch muscle fibers. If those are the muscle fibers that have the most capacity to grow. I do realize, and I've shared this with you before, that the slower twitch muscle fibers, a lot of people don't think they can grow, but they actually can grow too. But you're probably looking at twice the growth, at least from the research I've seen from Chris Beardsley and Brad Schoenfeld, two guys who I have a tremendous respect for. You're looking at the fast twitch muscle fibers having more capacity to grow, so you can't just abandon those guys. And again, if you're using a little bit lighter weight to failure, you're probably covering a lot of that. But keep your rep range open. Keep doing the 6s, the 8s, the 10s, and by all means, throw in some 15s and 20s. But don't think of it as magically cutting. They're not going to magically cut. They'll actually stimulate or help maintain growth in your slow twitch muscle fibers. So think of it that way. Think of your training as a time to, you're probably going to have a hard time building muscle when you're dieting, right? But at least try to maintain it. At least try to maintain it. And, I've talked a little bit about nutritionally, how you should really not sacrifice any nutrition around the training window. That also applies to your training. So don't lighten up under this false belief that lightening up the weight and doing more reps is going to magically make you more defined. That's going to come from your diet, okay? That's going to come primarily from your diet, and then if you guys are into the chemical part of it, there's chemicals that do that. But just don't back off your weight and abandon your heavier sets.